You sit down at a table at a gambling hall. You meet eyes with this beautiful woman, one of the players of course, sitting across from you. She's really nice to look at. Blue eyes, black hair, pale skin, absolutely wonderful. In one hand, you have a fine cigarette, be it English, Turkish, perhaps even American. And to the left of you, you have a dry martini, shaken, but not stirred. You play your next hand, and you win a considerable amount of money, might I add. And you approach this woman afterwards, and she agrees to meet you at your hotel room, because you are Sean Connery, and you are James Bond. But then again, you're not really James Bond, and you can never be Sean Connery. But after watching that opening scene from Dr. No, you probably wish you were Sean Connery. And if you're a woman, you probably wish you were in the presence of the wonderful Sean Connery. My name is Colin Ganem. I'm a marketing student, but more importantly, I've watched many James Bond films, often being portrayed by different actors each time. But I found that none of them have ever felt more surreal and as sophisticated as when the character of James Bond was being portrayed by Sean Connery. So upon viewing this brief presentation I have videotaped here for you, I hope to better your understanding of Sean Connery's James Bond and how he was an influential pop culture icon, why Sean Connery is better than any of the other actors who have played James Bond, and why you should immerse yourself in the world of Sean Connery, the original, true, big screen James Bond. Sean Connery's James Bond was the most influential on general popular culture, mainly because within his main films, like Goldfinger for example, that has just been referenced to in a lot of different areas of especially North American media, like movies and films and general pop culture. And there's one scene in Goldfinger actually, in which Bond gets strapped to this table, and the villain, of course the main villain, Goldfinger, has a laser pointed directly at his crotch, and it's slowly inching towards him, and just kind of builds up suspense, of course, before Sean Connery as Bond. He pops out and he escapes. I've seen that scene referenced in just so many different areas of popular culture. First off being The Simpsons. They kind of spoofed that with Homer's boss when The Simpsons moved to Cypress Creek, and I think there's like a secret agent caricature that's talking to Homer's boss when he gets strapped to a table and he's got the laser pointed at his crotch. He's like, "Scorpio, you're mad." And it's just a hilarious little spoof. And when he escapes actually, Homer walks in, tackles him to the ground because he's on the way talking to his boss, and they capture and shoot him up, and just an interesting little spoof. And the second of which I would say is in Austin Powers' Goldmember, which is a giant sort of spoof actually on Goldfinger, Sean Connery's movie. And they do the same thing with the character who plays Austin Powers' father, Nigel Powers, and he gets strapped to the table and he escapes. So it's through those examples I just think that Sean Connery's been the biggest influence, because I haven't really seen anything else from the other major actors who played James Bond. I haven't seen any of their major references towards popular culture as much as Sean Connery in his movies when he played James Bond. So, the satisfaction. The satisfaction in knowing that Sean Connery is indeed the greatest Bond of all time, and comparisons to some of the other actors who portrayed James Bond. But first off, individually, you have to understand that Sean Connery, he was the first Bond, yes, but he gave the other actors, I guess, who would portray James Bond in the future a sort of standard to look up to in terms of how the character should be portrayed. And they're generally all portrayed the same, James Bond. Like, he's a womanizer, he's a smooth talker, he's got a lot of gadgetry, and he's smooth, he's suave, he's a spy. That's what he does and who he is. But Sean Connery, he brought a sort of manliness, I guess, to the character, in which that couldn't really be brought to by anybody else, because he brought that part of his personality, I would say. Like when he was 16, he moved out at a young age to go work in the Navy, and then he got into acting through his bodybuilding career. So, he's a man. That's just who Sean Connery kind of was. And you can see that within his choreography, you can see that with the way he acts. Like during the one big fight scene in From Russia with Love, he just gets in this really insanely dirty fight, and the woman that he's with comes up, he's just like, "You just killed James Bond," because he was fighting with somebody impostoring as him, and he's just like, well, I guess that proves that nobody's invincible. He was just that kind of cool guy.
And here is our golden boy, Sean Connery James Bond. Let's see how he compares with the other James Bonds. So first up we have Pierce Brosnan. He was a bit more of the high-flying, late 90s, early 2000s James Bond. He was in Die Another Day, The World's Not Enough, GoldenEye, and he placed a lot more of his emphasis on gadgetry, such as introducing us to the invisible Aston Martin. However, what took away from a lot of the willing suspension of disbelief about a couple of his films is that in a lot of them he was using CGI. So it'd be CGI Pierce Brosnan that we could see as James Bond, such as when he's windsurfing, and it just looks like Gumby when he's on those waves. It was just a bit too unrealistic, and Sean Connery was able to utilize his environment without using too much technology for the core aspects of his films, but he did once in a while have some of the usage of green screen, such as when he was involved in driving and chase scenes. Next we have Roger Moore, who was in A View to a Kill, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, and he was received by the critics as being a more witty Bond. He was considered to be a more light-hearted James Bond. But in direct comparison to Sean Connery, according to IMDb facts, he never did any of his own stunts, unlike Sean Connery, who did all of his own stunts within the Bond movies. Edge, Sean Connery. And our final competitor is Daniel Craig, the newest James Bond. He does his own stunts, he's very well received by his critics, and he's also in very good physical shape, almost similar to that of Sean Connery, maybe just a little bit shorter. So if they're both well received by their critics, do their own stunts, critically acclaimed, how else do we sell this contest between Sean Connery and Daniel Craig? Answer, swimsuit competition. Presented by the one and only Sir Sean Connery.
Hello there, I'm Sean Connery. I would like to thank Colin for allowing me to help him with his dilemma. What is it again? Best Bond. Ah, yes. I would understand that that is no contest. That indeed, yes, I am the best James Bond of all time. What is it? Proof. Ah, yes. Swimsuit competition. Well, that I can do. Let's look at the contestants. Myself. And there's also this new youngin', Daniel Craig. Well, let's take a direct comparison. Zoom in on these pictures if you can. Oh, alright. You see, I'm on the beach, yes, I've got my fashionable pink t-shirt on, and I've got a lovely woman sitting next to me. I hope it was Ursula Andress. She was my favorite. And over here we have Daniel Craig. No woman with him, and his shirt is off. Well, I believe this is no contest, as I have the most chest hair, and a real man sports all of his hair to the beach. Look at this Daniel Craig. Who does he think this is? You think Team Edward? Team Jacob? You think he's from Twilight or something? He's got almost no chest hair to speak of. While I, on the other hand, am a man. I do not shave any of my chest hair. I keep it all with me, on the beach, with the girls. Daniel Craig, he's alone. I win.
Wow, just fantastic. I'd like to personally just extend my thanks towards Sean Connery for coming over to help decide the contest and to help prove that he is indeed the greatest James Bond of all time. So now we've learned about how he has influenced popular culture and how he compares to the other actors who have portrayed James Bond. But now let's talk about Sean Connery's role in portraying James Bond as an important historical figure, as somebody in fiction who may have represented the historical aspects of his films. And Sean's character, when he introduced James Bond, it heavily reflected on the themes of the Cold War and how spies may have been used during the Cold War.
on both sides, on the eastern and the western areas. Because of the plot of Sean Connery's first film as James Bond, Dr. No. Dr. No is the main villain who attempts to use rockets supplied by the Soviets, who are trying to use America and England as their main battlefield. And of course the villain is a Chinese mad scientist, so it just reinforces the themes of who were the enemies on the eastern side of the Cold War. The main superpowers being Russia and, of course, China. So these themes of rivalry were heavily influenced in the James Bond films, especially when Sean Connery was acting within them. So in conclusion, Sean Connery started the pop culture influence of the character James Bond. He developed and presented the personality of the characters so that the other actors who would play James Bond could come to follow and set as the standard. Many of the villains that Sean Connery thwarted within his movies led to James Bond being explored from a historical perspective. So naturally, my recommendations to you now would be to at least pick up the Sean Connery Part 1 collection, which includes Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger. Goldfinger is a fantastic one for his historical influences and the pop culture references. From Russia with Love has some fantastic choreography and some of the stunts and fight scenes that Sean Connery did on his own. And of course Dr. No being the first foray into the Sean Connery James Bond adventure. So hopefully with my help, I hope that you can all become worldly connoisseurs, much like a secret agent, much like Mr. James Bond.